started. I want to welcome our audience to this 14th session of our series, Biotech and Innovation in the Time of COVID. And I'm thrilled to be joined for this episode by Mike Schrader, founder and CEO of Vaxxis Technologies, one of the startups that has graduated out of LabCentral, and by Meredith Fisher, partner at the Partners Innovation Fund, as well as CEO of one of our startups here at LabCentral, Mediar Therapeutics. And our topic today is really about venture financing and learnings that we can bring for our audience to see, what have we learned? What would we wish to have known when we set out, and what are the lessons that they can take for the building of their own companies? And I thought we'd start with Mike, because you can tell us the story of who you are and how you got to being in the seat of a CEO of a startup, and let's just go with that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Johannes. Look forward to the discussion today. So hi, everyone. My name is Michael Schrader, as Johannes mentioned, and I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Vaxxis Technologies. And Vaxxis is developing a platform technology that came from both Tufts and MIT. We call the platform Mimics, and essentially it's a patch-based delivery system that allows for sustained release of anything from small molecules to very large biologics like vaccines, with just a couple minutes of wear time. So the patch is placed onto the skin, left there for about 5 minutes, and then taken off and thrown away. And yet the sustained release enabled by that short 5-minute wear time can last over a tunable range, anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks to a couple of months. And our lead program on that platform is actually a COVID and flu seasonal vaccine. So we're combining both COVID and flu together in a single patch. It's a product that's aimed to be shipped directly to patients for seasonal protection against both COVID and flu. So stepping back in time, prior to Vaxxis, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Spent the first 6 or 7 years of my career actually designing cars in the auto industry. So a very non-traditional background to enter this space. I went back to business school, and really my interest was finding a technology that was something different than just a mobile app, not to knock that space at all, but that really wasn't of interest to me, that I could build a company around. And fortunately came across a really, really interesting material breakthrough out of Tufts University that played into my strengths as kind of a plastics design engineer, and built the original Vaxxis around that, and got a lucky break in 2014 when a professor from MIT, an immunologist actually, was trying to generate a breakthrough HIV vaccine, used our material in some of his initial work because he couldn't find another material that could accommodate all the things he needed. We ended up falling in love with his application of our material, and have really focused on building the company around that since 2015. So that's how we get to where we are today.
Very good, and I'm sure we'll dig much deeper into that as well. Meredith, may I turn it over to you and ask you to maybe explain before we go into the nuts and bolts of how to venture finance, give us a little bit of your background of also PIF's investment interests, as well as your current company, Mediar, that you're interim CEO of.
Sure. So hi to everyone who's on the channel today, and Johannes, thanks for the invitation. So I'm a partner at the National Brigham Ventures Fund, and we are essentially the strategic venture arm of National Brigham. Just as a brief orientation for those of you who may not know the Boston area, or even are within Boston but don't know National Brigham, we're the largest group of academic medical research hospitals affiliated with Harvard Medical School. And so the fund was really set up to be dollars that could be invested into spin-out companies that utilize intellectual property and discoveries from our researchers and clinicians as part of the foundational aspects of their technology or their programs. It doesn't have to be exclusive to National Brigham, but that's an important component to the way that we think about investments. My own role, as Johannes said, as a partner is twofold. So one, we have sort of a more traditional institutional approach to the way that we make investments. And that in particular would be a company or a team. For instance, if Michael's work had actually originated from one of our researchers, he and that team could have come and pitched us in a more traditional institutional framework, where we would listen to the pitch, we would run a diligence process, and we would take a decision about participation or leading and syndicating the investment as sort of the standard venture effort. In addition to that, I wear a second hat, which is really a privilege to do so because of the environment and the place where we sit, which is that we also originate companies ourselves. Because we see technologies and discoveries emerging so early in the process, pre-publication, pre-patent filing, we have a pipeline that enables us to actually nucleate and sort of develop companies internally ourselves. And so Meteor is a great example of that, where we identified the researchers and the research. We actually helped even shape some of the foundational IP, and then we actually went through and delivered a company and a financing around that in partnership with other early stage investors. So it's a nice piece of what we do, and it actually reflects sort of, like I said, the privileged position that we have and that we're really able to do both of those things within the fund. It would be challenging for us to do all of either one of those, but we can talk more about sort of where those trade-offs are maybe later on in the discussion.
What is the, thank you, Meredith, what is the, describe to me what the different experience will be like for one of your academic PIs when they go. I mean, typically they would send a technology disclosure form to the TLO and talk about these things that they've invented before they write a paper about it. And so now with you guys sitting there and looking at assets also from a fund perspective, how does that change the experience for the founders? Will you be proactively soliciting them? Tell us a little bit about that process.
So Johannes, it's a great question. It really depends. Meteor is a great example of one where we actually had an investment thesis around fibrosis, went out and actually built a landscape of the work that was going on within our system and identified 3 PIs. One of them actually had put an investment disclosure in. The other 2, in fact, had not. But we're interacting with our office in various other ways. So we became aware of it. And we actually went out, and they had not actually thought about putting a company together themselves. And so we were able to really actually coalesce that, sort of de novo. In other instances where there are PIs who are really more sort of bent towards entrepreneurship, they come and talk to us as well. And there's a couple ways that we interact with them. Sometimes it is, I've done this before, I want to do this again. Let's talk through what the strategy should be. Do you think I'm ready? What guidance would you have? All the way to the point that I have an idea and I even have an entrepreneur in mind. Could you help me even vet them or build out the team? And so it really runs a spectrum of people who have not done this before, and we work with them to sort of get them to a point of comfort in being a founder, which, let me be clear, not everyone reaches. Not everyone is built to do this, to folks who really already sort of have that entrepreneurial spirit, and we can interact with them across many different dimensions, even just helping them think through some of the experimental work that would be more valuable to sort of create a data package that is ready for venture investment as well. And I think that's actually an important piece of what we do, because oftentimes that work is the less sexy work and stuff that doesn't necessarily get you the cover of Nature, but oftentimes can be the data that actually gets you millions of dollars in funding.
Yeah. So would the fund be able to give me, if I'm a PI at Mass General and I'm bootstrapping my lab and I have an NIH grant that's running out, but I have this cool idea and I lead that mouse experiment. Can I come to you and ask you for funding to do the mouse experiment?
So my dollars are only in exchange for equity in a company. We do have, we are fortunate in that we do have some funds that are both annual or department driven, or now we hope by starting in next year, more formal into actually being able to put some more money to work to help to support those translational efforts. But, oftentimes the challenge there is those are the highest risk dollars. They're also the highest reward dollars. I think for us at the fund, as I said, we sit just on the other side of that. So I can tell you that at any one time, I have somewhere between 5 to 10 things that if they just had that mouse experiment, would be a difference. We work to try to hustle those things, but as I said, fundamentally, I have to exchange dollars for stock. I don't get to invest in PIs. It's somewhat protective for us as well, frankly. So I don't fully get to pick and choose myself, and we think it's important to also get market validation when we make an investment. And again, something we can talk about later on about how we put syndicates together and other decision-making that we have around when a company gets funded or how.
Yeah, I think that is such an important interface and really phase change between the academic world, and now the same project needs to somehow make it into this other phase that is the venture world, or maybe that's the commercial world. It doesn't necessarily have to be venture funded. We know that there are other options to get your company financed. And here, Mike's team has actually been very good at opening non-dilutive, so-called non-dilutive channels of financing through grants and other means. And sometimes I chuckle with Michael because he built a revenue-driven company as much as he built a venture-funded company. Michael, do you want to describe a little bit about those vehicles and how you've been able to leverage that to raise non-dilutive financing for your company?
Yeah, happy to. So, I think as a backdrop, I mentioned that me and my three co-founders really founded this company as grad students. And I think the practical reality for younger founders, inexperienced founders, is that accessing venture capital is very hard, if not nearly impossible for folks at that stage in their career. We don't have a track record. And because there are so many wonderful entrepreneurs and life science leaders and now venture creation firms in Boston all fighting for the same VC dollars that we are, you've really got to do things 10 times better than those firms that are led by more established, kind of teams in order to even be in the discussion for venture dollars. So I think that as a starting point was kind of a painful reality for me. We knew our science was great. We knew we had a really, really unique opportunity to deliver with this platform, but we also realized that we were up against some teams that had delivered products and successful companies and good returns to their investors. And so we were starting from behind. And so as Johannes mentioned, we knew we had to get creative in getting some of the early funding to help close the gap and prove to those investors that we could deliver. And so we actually got most of our early funding, about $160,000 in funding from competitions. And so I think of that as really kind of our early seed funding that allowed us to do a little bit of science, that allowed us to actually get our first pharma partnership. So we had one or two early pharma partnerships that were, $50,000, $60,000 deals, not massive by any means, but some validation that pharma was interested in what we were working on. And so those kind of served as the early stepping stones for us before we were able to get our first tranche of VC funding in. And that first tranche of VC funding for us was about $3.6 million, $3.7 million. So it was a nice sized tranche of funding. But prior to that, we had brought in, again, at least $160,000 from those competitions, somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 in revenue from pharma partners, and we had gotten one or two early NIH grants, $150,000, $200,000 NIH grants. So we probably had, $500,000 to $600,000 in the bank from those channels before we got our first venture financing. Once we got that venture financing, we thought we were in the clear and we thought life would get easier. But once again, we realized we had a powerful platform technology, and we had a lot of directions we wanted to explore with that technology. So we made the strategic decision to go out and be very serious about the granting ecosystem and continuing to push on that granting ecosystem. So to date, we've now raised in the neighborhood of $17 to $18 million in non-dilutive financing. So we have active grants today from DARPA, BARDA, NIH, NSF, Gates Foundation, and NASA. So all of these different organizations have different priorities. And the beauty is, our platform is versatile enough that we can solve different problems for different groups. So whether it's protecting molecules from radiation in space, which is what NASA cares about, to, making sure we can get better birth control access to people around the world, which is the Gates priority, we have a platform that's versatile enough to live in all those worlds. So early on, we would chase these grant opportunities that allowed us to explore different avenues for the platform. And then over time, we began to realize really there were a couple of sweet spots for the platform. Vaccines were our holy grail. This is really an area where our platform could enable better access, but also far more efficacious vaccines. And to us, that was kind of the killer app. And so we changed our grant strategy, over the last 2 or 3 years to really take portions of our product development plan, our commercialization strategy, and submit those off to granting agencies. So rather than chasing grants that would give us money, we were chasing grants that would allow us to really move the product towards the clinic. And I think that's an important lesson for a lot of companies, is it's very easy to get drawn into chasing money to keep the company alive. And I think when you get to the point where you can switch that mentality around to go chase grants that actually allow you to deliver on your commercialization strategy, to me, that's really That's kind of the holy grail that every company should really aspire to. And so now we've brought on a new round of venture financing in 2019. Again, very fortunate. We've got wonderful investors that have come and joined the team, but we still are just now being awarded a sizable grant from the NIH for manufacturing scale up. We have another NIH grant we're applying toward for a clinical trial grant. It's a very specific clinical trial grant. So there are still wonderful opportunities for us to basically, leverage that venture capital financing, but bring in 2, 3, 4x in grant financing to support. And quite frankly, I'm not sure if that'll ever stop. We're working with BARDA right now. As most folks have seen, BARDA has given grants to companies in the COVID space north of $2 billion in some cases. So there's still opportunities to continue to pursue larger amounts of money for even more advanced development, and we'll continue to do that.
I think we ought to remind the audience of your program. I don't think you've mentioned it. You are getting ready. Can you talk about it even?
Yeah.
Or is it still top secret?
Yeah, so we've come out with a couple press releases just over the past few weeks, so we can. So, we as a company are called Vaxxess, right? VAXESS. You can probably tell from the name, we've always been active in the vaccine space. And so what's been interesting to us is, 2 or 3 years ago, nobody wanted it. And now a day doesn't go by where I have somebody from a different company in the pharma industry calling me to say, hey, how can we become a vaccine company or an infectious disease company? So it's been interesting to see the shift. So we jumped into the COVID race, back in February or March, very early on. I think the approach we took was a little bit different. If you look at the kind of the best-selling products in the vaccine space today, most of those products were not the first to enter their market. So Prevnar 13 is the whale from Pfizer. It's about a $6 billion per year product. It was not the first product in the pneumococcal vaccine space, similar with Gardasil and many others. So what we decided to look at was not how can we win the race to be first to market, and congrats to Pfizer and Moderna and J&J. We've seen some really exciting data coming out lately that I think we're going to get a vaccine over the hump, which is great news for all of us. We wanted instead to think about what the world's going to need in 3 to 4 years. Our assumption at that time is that COVID will become endemic. It'll start to look more like flu. It'll be around every year, and people are going to need to get boosters, both to raise their antibody levels that tend to wane over time, but also to deal with some occurrences of strain drift. So maybe not so bad as influenza, where it's changing really rapidly every season, but every couple of years. So we decided to really focus on a seasonal protection product. So this is a patch that combines both COVID and flu vaccines into a single patch. And the patch offers a couple of benefits that we think are very compelling. So first and foremost, the product is shelf stable. It can be shipped without cold chain, which is a really, really big deal. We've seen this as a challenge with some of the leading mRNA vaccines. They need to be frozen at either -20 or -80 C, which is a huge distribution challenge. Number 2, the patch protects with a single administration. So our patch was really invented by an immunologist at MIT. I won't go into the biology of it, but it's aimed at making vaccines work far better. And so because of that, we're able to get protection with a single dose. Number 3 for us, I think, is the fact that it's this easy, accessible format. So no more needle and syringe. It's a simple patch that is applied to the skin. And in the long run, we hope to be able to ship directly to people for administration in the comfort of their own homes. So this is really the program that we're working on. And again, today we have generous support from BARDA, the NIH, and a few others to really rapidly advance this program. Again, not with the aim of ending the COVID pandemic, but instead delivering a product in 3 to 4 years that we think can kind of take over the market and be compelling in the long run.
Thank you, Michael. I think we needed to catch everybody up on the exciting stuff that you are doing. Meredith, as an investor, I think we like to hear what Michael said is that he's going after grants, not just to get money, but to reach meaningful milestones. I think that's an important differentiator. In your investor experience, how are you looking at companies that are financed with grants? Are you prejudiced against them? Or do you see it as a valuable tool? Do you think grant financing is a distraction that teams should ignore? I know that there's different thinking out there.
Yeah, so I probably am going to give you a broad answer to say, and I think it reflects a little bit of the point that Michael was alluding to. We're in a privileged position at the fund in that we participate in investments alongside those VCs that Michael was speaking to, which are ones that are so well funded and sort of have their own capabilities to do new co-creation. And so their dollars really tend to disproportionately go towards those companies that they're baking themselves, right? In addition to that, though, we also put dollars into companies that do not get funded by those groups as well, that originate elsewhere. And in those, we do like to see that. In fact, company that I followed for probably almost 2 years was seed funded and grant funded for that time, and was able to develop a data package that then put them in a position to bring in a robust $25 million Series A to get them through the clinic. And I will give the founder and entrepreneur a significant amount of credit for, quote, gutting it out for those few years on, let's say, less funding than they would have liked, but a great use of funds and not diluting themselves in the bigger picture, right? Did they get the salary that they probably wanted? No. Did they get to do all the experiments they probably wanted? No. But did they have a different eye for what the prize for them was and deliver on that? Yes. And so those are two things that we hold as valuable when we think about an opportunity. But not all of our companies fall into that category simply because there's so many different ways that groups get financed.
Yeah, we clearly see a big shifting in the venture approach to companies. The traditional venture financing provides capital for existing businesses. I think the mainstream in Cambridge nowadays is company creation out of individual funds. That makes it harder for founding groups that come out of our academic institutions.
It does, including us as a founding venture team. When we don't actually write a check all by ourselves, we always look for syndicate partners, even if we're only putting $500,000 to work because of a number of factors. So yeah, it's a different dynamic.
Because I think many of our audience participants might not be very familiar with many of these terms. What is it when you talk about syndicating a venture round? What do you mean with that?
Yeah, so that's the group of investors that we want to assemble to form the dollar, or to put the dollars to work in a company, and also usually to form the basis of the board and governance aspects of the company as well. The way that we think about syndicating is looking for groups that have the same risk appetite that we do in how much, modality risk, clinical risk, you name it, team risk that you're willing to take, as well as also timing. So how far away from the clinic people have appetite for, as well as also, frankly, this is a network and a relationship game as well as everything else. And so we also think about who we just like to invest with, and tend to go back to those groups more routinely. And you see that, with many different groups. So it's an important aspect, both in how to get the company started and funded, to make sure that the company you think has the right set of investors who are going to support it in that early stage, and also long term, whether they have additional capital to continue to keep financing the company. And so part of the reason that we like to syndicate deals is because it should lower the risk for follow-on financing for the company if the company is successful in meeting their milestones, versus having that company have to go out de novo every single time and bring all new investors in at every stage, which is a big onus and a lot of work, as Michael, who has been out fundraising, can probably even more than I can.
Yeah, Michael, tell us about some of your experience on the road. It's nice if you have a lead investor like Meredith who can activate her network for you and bring in like-minded investors. When you raise your first round or maybe your second round, you might not have had that privilege. So what are the learnings that you have over the years now that you would share with a rookie startup entrepreneur who takes the class that you came out of at HBS? What is it that they should know that you wish you'd have known then?
Yeah, so I mean, our fundraising back in, we first raised our first round of capital, it was brutally hard. And I think there's a running joke around Harvard. We're the only company to win the Harvard Business Plan competition twice. We won it in 2 back-to-back years, and we used to brag about this. And I had a very nice professor who told me to stop bragging about it. He said, the only reason you guys have won it twice is because every other company that won it once went out and raised venture financing and became ineligible to participate again. We were the only company that couldn't use that as a springboard to raise money. So it was a brutal process for us. I'd say we probably got rejected by 50 or 60 funds or angel groups along the way. And I think this gets back to my initial point is we were pretty naive in thinking we had great data. We were excited about our story. We didn't realize that, you know, the team was going to be seen so negatively by the investment community just because of our lack of track record that we were not going to have to just match or beat all these others that we were out there competing for venture dollars with. We were going to have to beat them by 10x. And so it really took, I think, us. I liked Meredith's comment about the company that basically kind of did a lot more than expected with a lot less money than expected and made some personal sacrifices. And I think that was really our story too. So it was kind of a 2-year slog of living on less money than we'd like while surviving on grants and really finding creative ways to push the company forward, the science forward, build some of these pharma partnerships in order to get that first tranche of financing. So a couple of key takeaways for me. One is, you know, if investors can't look to a personal track record for me as a CEO or to my team, they're going to look for external verification that what we're doing is great. So for us, getting 2 pharma deals over the hump with big name pharma partners, even though they were only $60,000 to $100,000 deals, that was nice, kind of validation of the science. So I think that was the first thing that was very, very helpful for us. I think the other elements that were helpful for us is we built an advisory board, as most companies do. We were, I think, pretty aggressive in asking our advisors to go out and stick their necks out for us. And we were very fortunate that we had wonderful advisors that were willing to do that. So if I picked up the phone and called a venture fund, it meant far less than one of our wonderful advisors like Vicky Sato picking up the phone and calling one of those venture funds. So see if you can build those advisors that are willing to go out and kind of work and scrap on your behalf. The final thing that I think I'll say is one of my favorite funding stories that I've heard was from the founder of Ginkgo Bioworks. And he talked about Ginkgo in their early days. Of course, we now know Ginkgo is this massive success and, oh, synthetic biology, it's so obvious. When they started the company, nobody really knew what to make of that field, right? And what he said is, they actually set up a Salesforce CRM to do grant funnel management, almost like instead of customers, they were looking at granting agencies. He did all that to build this early on. And he basically said, we went to all these venture funds. They said, what are you going to do with your technology? They said, we're not sure, but it's going to be huge when it works. And the venture funds weren't really interested in that. So they were off in this, you know, kind of different world of synthetic biology, paving a trail. All the, I'll say, existing investors were looking at other areas at that time. I don't know what was hot at the moment, but let's say it was, you know, maybe gene therapy. I don't know, whatever was hot at the moment. All the investors were kind of looking over here, which meant that all the dollars were going that direction. All the cool technologies were going to kind of experienced founders or investors in that area. And they were off over here dabbling in synthetic biology. And then eventually they moved it along enough where everybody said, oh yeah, well, obviously the synthetic biology is going to be a hot thing. So for first-time founders, young founders, I don't think it always benefits you to be playing in the same area as is expected or understood to be the hot and popular area today. I think you're going to be competing against bigger dogs. I think you're going to be better off finding big problems or kind of novel new areas that maybe are not yet appreciated as being important. Go try and build your niche there, and over time, hopefully prove that this is a compelling area. And I think we got our lucky break. Lucky is a hard word to use. COVID really exposed the need for better vaccine technology. So COVID kind of swung things in our favor, whereas 2 or 3 years prior, you were seeing maybe 1 to 2 vaccine companies get funded. It's a whole new world now, largely because of COVID. So those are some of the takeaways from us.
I think Meredith did a short stint at Ginkgo. She might have had a
I'm smiling, laughing, Michael, only because I was the person that worked on the CRM for the grant work at Ginkgo. I was at MIT school when Jason, Reshma, and Barry and the rest of the team were finishing up their PhDs in bioengineering. So we were sitting in the status center writing grants. And then on the other side of that, I ended up joining them and was the BD person that actually, much like you, landed us the first industry deals, which also I would say didn't have huge dollars, but had huge validation, and were the basis under which, you know, Jason et al. Were able to go out, frankly, you're right, unsuccessfully in venture, but more successfully in a different set of investors who had bigger checks to write and a much longer time horizon for return and vision. And so, frankly, Ginkgo failed to raise venture funds. And there was a reason for that. It wasn't a match. Not a criticism of either groups, but they found their match, and you can see what they've done with it today, which is perfect. When I think back to our days sitting on a ripped up couch in the Status Center, writing BARDA and DARPA grants as students, and then as scrappy entrepreneurs. So yes, near and dear to my heart.
I swear that wasn't staged. I had no idea. That is actually hilarious. But that's one of my favorite stories, hearing Jason tell that story. It's great.
Well, I lived it with Jay and I lived it literally day in, day out. So
I want to point the audience to, we are already in the final stretch of our 45 minutes that we have here, and the audience has an ability to send me questions. So if you have others, please contribute them. But they're coming at me fast and furious. And so one of the questions that I think fits very well into both of your narratives right now is very short. Did you ever think of giving up? Michael, first.
Of course. So I'm going to delve into my history as a kid. I grew up in Indiana, all right? I grew up in this small town in southern Indiana. If you grew up in Indiana as a kid, you play basketball, and everybody wants to play basketball. Everybody dreams of playing basketball. That's just all you do. That's kind of all we know in Indiana, right? We're not proud of that. We need to work on that, but that's all you know. So I will tell you, I got cut from the 7th grade basketball team, and I became the manager of the 7th grade basketball team. I got cut from the basketball team again in 8th grade. I became the manager of the 8th grade basketball. In 9th grade, I got the last spot on the B team of the basketball team, and finally started to make it into the world of basketball. So I think that experience has shaped me in that it was a positive outcome after getting shot down over and over and over again. So I think when it came to Vaxis, I saw so many similarities. Everyone told me to give up. I had gotten an MBA from a business school. I had turned down a job that would have paid me still more than I'm making today, several years later. So I've had multiple people throughout the years kind of suggest that we give up and quit. Even my dad still jokes and asks me when I'm going to go get a real job. So I still hear these comments on a very, very regular basis. But I think what we realized is that there was a major problem with inequality of vaccine access around the world. We still believe this is true today. I think last time I looked, there were roughly 2 to 2.5 million people every year dying from diseases for which we have effective vaccines, which is just completely absurd to me, right? So this is a massive problem. It's a problem that I think motivates us every single day, and it's a problem that's got to get solved in the long run. And what has become clear to us is that, the big pharma companies, there's lots of people inside them that would like to solve that problem. It's not going to happen. It has to be somebody like us that's willing to make some of those sacrifices and try to dig on these things. So I'd say that motivation for me has kind of allowed me to power through, even when doubt did set in at times, or we took some hard rejections along the way.
Meredith, did you have breakpoints in some of your startups that you were with?
Yeah, I mean, Meteor is a great story because we got that financed, and the data are going terrifically, and it's a success. I've run landscape projects within our organization where I've uncovered nothing that was actionable. I've uncovered something that was actionable, and I found that PI was just not going to be a founder. I found a founder piece of and technology that I thought was going to be financeable, and we failed to get it financed. I've recruited entrepreneurs in to work alongside me, and we have not been able to get those companies started. So the roadkill along this is long, and I could probably talk about it for hours, but just to say, when it works, you feel like a genius, and when it doesn't, you feel like an idiot. And I think the ask or the mark of an entrepreneur, be it someone who wants to try to start Nucos from inside where I am, or Michael, who's living out in the wilds, right, of the jungle, is that your mindset? And if it is, then you probably aren't asking yourself, am I going to stay or not? You're just trying to figure out the next, the next move, basically.
And can I build on that really quickly? Because I think the most remarkable entrepreneurs I've ever known are able to maintain their swagger when they go in to pitch a VC or partner, knowing that their company is going to run out of cash within a week, right? And this is one of I think the most remarkable traits of some entrepreneurs that I've seen is that you get rejected a lot, and you have to be able to still walk into that next meeting with just as much swagger, confidence as you had in the previous one. When you go to pitch an investor, at the end of the day, they want somebody who's exuding confidence. They want somebody they feel like has 50 options in front of them. And so it's your job to put that smiling face on. And I think that's one of the greatest skills that I've seen. Some of the mentors that I've had along the way have just been able to put that smiling face on, literally knowing that doom is knocking at their door, and they usually manage to pull it out. So anyway, I think that's one of the great skills you see in some of the scrappy entrepreneurs that I've watched and learned from over the years.
Here's another question. Thank you, Michael, for that comment. The question goes to advise companies in how to plan for their financing if they have a choice. How would a NUCO balance the equity that they are providing the VC fund versus the hospital versus the founders? And that question, of course, assumes that the founding group has any choice in it. Meredith, how is that done typically?
Yeah, well, you're not going to get to set your price with venture unless you are an extreme outlier. Especially so if you're new, the market is going to tell you what the company is worth. You may or may not like that. You may or not want to argue about it. By way of equity around, let's say, a license to IP and a founder, whoever that founding team is, I think our mindset, of course, because I sit within a system, as well as also want to be founder friendly, and that includes a founding team, is I would say that we tend to lean towards being very founder friendly and wanting that team and that foundational institution to have a significant portion of that founding equity. That means, but some of the reason for that is one, it's then is a value to us in the return of the license, but also it means that we can compete with some of the other groups that may have a lot more money and an ability to mobilize that capital much faster than I do, because I still have to have them go out and raise capital away from me. And so it allows me to be competitive. So it seems both altruistic in some ways, but it's also self-serving. But that's kind of the best answer that I can give. Perhaps if we had $800 million and could do it all ourselves, I'd be, quote, more greedy. I'd hope not. But I think here it's really trying to recognize this founding piece. The only last thing I would say there, and I say this to PIs all the time, and they need to keep this in mind, is that it's oftentimes the team that you may start with is not the team that you end up with. And I mean that even through a financing process. We've seen so many PIs who just met somebody on the soccer field, or they know somebody in their circles, and all of a sudden this person is an entrepreneur and they're not the right person, and they have unrealistic expectations around equity and compensation and value add. And so be very careful about who you put on your team and listen to the feedback from folks about whether they're the right fit or not. Because venture wants to incentivize, but we want to incentivize the right people.
I think that's a hugely valuable set of advice pieces that you're handing out here. And it has to do with the fact that money is not the same. The dollars on the check might be the same, but the value is not the same. If you with your financing acquire a supportive cast of characters that can sit on your board, that can be advisors to the management team, that can help you maybe figure out some of these founder conflicts that often do arise through experience of having been there, done that. I mean, the VCs are the ones that are doing this all the time, right? For them, it's one after the other. For most of our entrepreneurial teams, it's a very rare event that they start a company. And so the knowledge differential is pretty significant between these two. And as a founder, if you're able to leverage that to your advantage rather than fight against it, I think that is a very important piece of advice to take along.
And maybe could I chime in there just philosophically? I think the best advice I got when we were starting Vaxxus around equity splits is your goal as a first-time founder in particular should be to build a successful company. And if you do this, you're going to have future opportunities to make money and to control your own destiny. As kind of Meredith pointed out, as a first-time founder, you're probably not. Your goal is to get the right people around the table that are going to help you win that first time. After that, then you can control your own destiny. You can get a little more greedy. You can push for equity splits that are more in your favor, and you're going to have a lot more leverage to do it. So focus on winning first, more so than equity the first time through. The second piece of advice that I got, which I loved, was you as ongoing team members are always going to have future opportunities to grow your equity stake. Your investors and your academic PIs probably aren't without putting more money in, right? So certainly the university, the intellectual property came out of, they're just going to see their stake get diluted and dwindled over time. You're probably going to get re-upped as a founder many times in the future, and investors have to make future commitments to the company to put more capital in to get their stakes re-upped. So always remember that those are not kind of fixed values today. Over time, you've got an opportunity to increase your stake. Everybody else is inevitably going to decline. So just keep that in mind as you think about those initial founding agreements and what's fair.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And I think that insight into the right level of greed versus realism, I think, is an important one. There are many other questions. We won't get to any of them. We have only 2 minutes left, Meredith. But in that vein, one of the questions asked about sort of what are you looking for in the founders? What type of profile are you looking for in the founders? Can you try to highlight some of the character traits and maybe some of the areas that teams need to work on?
I'll answer that from two different perspectives, right? Because I work with different types of founders. First and foremost, I work with scientific founders. So those are the folks who have done the research, put the patent filing in and developed the data package that they then need to go and represent in front of venture, right? Myself first and then venture. You know, what I say there is I want someone who is a closer, meaning that they can actually sell their science and they can sell it in a translational and vision way. They don't need to actually deliver on that because I'm going to bring in another potential either founder or entrepreneur whose job is to actually operationalize that. But I need them to be strong in the room. I need them to have humility and understand that, yes, they've contributed a lot of value, but one, this is not the baby that they get to control. They actually hand their baby off to somebody else to raise. And so they have to be comfortable there. And they have to have a framework for understanding if they're successful, and I say this about myself as well, they become less and less important and engaged with the company over time because new capabilities and new money and new operators come in to take it all the way forward to get actually into the clinic and hopefully through approval and commercialization. So that's the science piece. Because we're running out of time on the teams piece. Similarly, I want a lot of those other things, but instead of having that scientific piece, I want that to have an operational or drug development piece. But a lot of the other elements are still the same.
Thank you. These were great thoughts. I hope that the audience took some of them. Hopefully they wrote them down feverishly and they're now taking them and working on them. As always, 45 minutes passed by way too fast. Mike, as CEO of Access, thank you very much for your time. And Meredith Fisher, thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing both of you around here, and we will announce our next episode when it is. And typically, this is the time where I announce the next episode. I don't see the date, so we don't have one yet. So bear with us. Check into
invite Michael and I back. Right.
Check into the LabCentral blog regularly and see our next events. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Johannes.